Welcome. I'm Terrel Rhodes, Vice President for Quality, Curriculum, and Assessment. Welcome to AAC&U's Next Generation Assessment Series on assessing student learning and institutional effectiveness. Today, hosts Tammie Cumming and David Miller speak with me about the value of being prepared, rubrics and validity.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tammie Cumming, Assistant Vice President and Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness at Brooklyn College of the City University of New York.
And I'm David Miller from the University of Florida, where I'm a professor in research and evaluation methods. And today it's our pleasure to welcome Terrel Rhodes, AAC&U's own, who will be talking to us today about the value rubrics.
Thank you, and welcome to all of our listeners. I'm Terrel Rhodes, Vice President for Quality, Curriculum, and Assessment, and Executive Director of Value at AAC&U. Delighted to be here.
Thanks so much, Terry, for joining us. So we'll take a few minutes today to talk about the value rubrics and how they came to be developed through AAC&U. And also, there's a lot of interest on how these can be used in a distance learning environment. At my institution, we use them, and we really enjoy using those as a framework for faculty to do their gen ed assessment. Can you tell us a little bit about how this project got started and the usage of these throughout the nation and perhaps the world?
Certainly. It's one of my favorite topics. When we were beginning to develop these over a decade ago, we decided that one of the things that was missing in higher education was an assessment approach at that time that actually built on the expertise of faculty and also focused on the outcomes that employers and faculty both shared in saying this is part of what we're trying to do to prepare students for success, both in college, but after college when they moved into the civic and employment arena upon completion of their credential in higher education. So teams of faculty from across the country, different types of institutions, came together looking at the research and existing rubrics and developed a set of 16 rubrics that focus on essential learning outcomes that both faculty and employers support as necessary for student success.
That's fascinating, Terry. It's good to hear about that project. One of the things that we have done with them, of course, is that we took some rubrics that you had developed or that the project had developed, and we called you and asked about making some small modifications just because of the local context. And of course, you approved that. And we found that to be a great way of thinking about these rubrics. Are there some changes or are there some things that you would expect to be happening as we move into this more online environment?
Yes, and indeed, it was something that we had anticipated when we were developing, not the current crisis, but what we had anticipated was we needed to develop something that was general and generic because campuses and faculty really confronted two primary issues. One was to be able to look at student learning across the various areas of study, colleges within a university, different institutions, but to be able to converse with the student and with their colleagues about what the learning looked like. And that's what the rubrics were about, was trying to describe what faculty were looking for when students were demonstrating, say, critical thinking. And we always thought that they would need to be modified in particular courses and particular programs, perhaps at particular institutions, to reflect the culture, the terminology, the emphases of the programs and courses that were being utilized and taught, that the rubrics would be applied to. The second basic thing that institutions and faculty found, though, was that just as with grades and accreditation, that the judgment of individual faculty on individual students was sometimes suspect because it was too non-objective from the faculty making a judgment about a student, to be able to put their judgment in a broader context. And so that the generic rubric provided that external validation and to create a framework or a landscape in which what any individual faculty was finding and doing, any student was finding and doing, any institution was finding and doing, could be placed in a broader context for validation beyond the individual without making a judgment about the individual, but about the learning that had taken place. And so we really did anticipate that they would be modified by individual faculty or programs or institutions, but the more that they were able to be closely aligned with the original rubric, that it would allow them and us to be able to place it in this broader context. And so now we're seeing in particular, as students have moved out of the classroom, the direct classroom, that's even more important to be able to give, because we're in a much more flexible environment where the learning is happening more and more out of our direct observation, but that the rubrics still allow us to have a measure that can be applied across those learning contexts.
We've done exactly that, Terry. I've been a big fan of having teams of faculty come together, review the value rubrics as a framework, and develop perhaps a modification in some instances. And we also encourage that they use the value rubrics as part of their grading, share them with the students so students understand how they'll be assessed, and then use that information also to tell the story of general education progress at the institution. It's been very helpful, and even throughout the world. I believe that you were talking about them not that long ago in Paris at the OECD AHELO project. So it's been exciting to watch this develop, and people are finding them useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to engaging in conversation ongoing.